There's a generation nobody really talks about, not because they're uninteresting, because they never demanded anyone pay attention. They're your coworker who quietly solves the problem everyone else is still arguing about. Your parent who seems emotionally distant but shows up without fail when things actually fall apart. The people who built the internet and still don't post about their lunch? That's Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. And their psychology might be the most layered and least examined of any generation alive today. To understand Gen X, start with one image: a metal key on a string worn around the neck of an 8-year-old walking home alone. By 1984, research found that approximately 7 million American children, aged 5 to 13, were spending their afternoons without adult supervision. Both parents are working, no way to check in. You let yourself in, made your own snack, and figured out the rest. Psychologists call this a high-contingency environment, where cause and effect operate without anyone softening the landing. Your brain learned to anticipate consequences before they arrive. That's why Gen X thinks several moves ahead in ways that baffle younger colleagues. It wasn't a gift. It was a Tuesday afternoon in 1979 with nothing but time and a problem to solve. Without screens or supervision, you dragged lumber from a vacant lot and built something, fixed your bike because no one else would, resolved arguments with neighborhood kids because sitting alone was worse. The self-reliance that defines Gen X didn't come from philosophy. It came from necessity. Gen X didn't just grow up with absent parents. They grew up watching the adult world contradict itself. Parents preached stability while divorce rates climbed. Companies demanded loyalty and handed out layoffs. Cold War teachers told children to duck under desks and act calm while implying the world could end. The message delivered to Gen X was consistent. The rules exist until they don't. Psychologists call what that produces defensive pessimism. Gen X calls it being realistic. It's emotional armor worn not out of anger, but out of pattern recognition. When the rug gets pulled enough times, you stop standing too close to the edge. This is also where their complicated relationship with authority was born. They reject it when it hasn't been earned. Growing up through Watergate and repeated institutional failures, they stopped handing respect to titles and started watching for actual capability. Show them competence, and they'll work harder than anyone. There's a reason Gen X rarely floods social media with personal updates, and it has nothing to do with technology. They grew up in a world where mistakes stayed local. Something embarrassing happened. A handful of people witnessed it, and over time, it softened into a story. Privacy wasn't a toggle. It was simply how reality worked. The dry humor Gen X became known for came from the same place. When adults act like everything is fine, while implying the world might end, you learn to hold two contradictory things at once. You meet discomfort with a joke, rather than a confession. That's not emotional immaturity. That's a functional adaptation to a world that repeatedly proved it couldn't be fully trusted. Ask Gen X what they respect, and you'll almost never hear rank or seniority. What they respect is the ability to actually do the thing. That value wasn't built in a classroom. It was built at 5 in the morning on a paper route in the cold, behind a fast food counter, doing mental math when the register broke. Gen X didn't get internships as their introduction to work. They got adult responsibilities while still children, and the world treated those responsibilities as real. Nobody praised them for participation. The neighborhood either got their newspaper or it didn't. Psychological research confirms this. Gen X scores higher on competence than any other living generation, and men and women score nearly identically. Because it wasn't built from self-esteem programming, it came from years of solving real problems without a safety net. Gen X will not ask you for help. Research confirms they seek social support during difficult periods, far less than other generations. Not because they lack people who would show up, but because asking feels like failure. But if you need them, they're already there. No announcement, no post about it, just quiet, competent presence when it matters. When parents were often unavailable during childhood, a small circle of friends became functional infrastructure. Loyalty to a few became ironclad. Loyalty to institutions remained permanently conditional. This is why Gen X workers seem contradictory to people around them. They were also hit economically in waves. The oldest were building careers when the dot-com bubble collapsed in 2000. The youngest graduated directly into the 2008 financial crisis. Between those two events, they watched restructuring cycles eliminate entire floors of workers who had followed every rule they were told to follow. Financial instability during formative career years doesn't evaporate when circumstances improve. It reorganizes how you calculate risk. This is why Gen X maintains multiple income streams at higher rates than other generations. Not ambition, memory. Gen X holds 31% of American leadership roles while making up only 20% of the adult population. That didn't come from cultural momentum. It came from being steady across a very long stretch of history that kept trying to knock them sideways. They are the bridge generation, old enough to remember life before the internet rewired everything, young enough to adapt without resistance, skeptical enough to question broken systems, competent enough to quietly build better ones. They hold the space between the generation stepping back and the generation stepping forward, providing stability that only becomes visible when it disappears. Bridges don't get celebrated. They don't trend. They just hold two places together across the gap year after year, without recognition and without complaint. And if you know anything about Generation X by now, you know that's exactly how they'd want it. If this resonated with you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing to the channel.